Shan, your key questions?
Yeah, I agree with those questions. It's appalling to me that somebody in custody who's such a high-profile defendant would have been allowed to have had that time. And plus, I think he had a cellmate as well. So that's very inexplicable. I think it raises huge issues for the case. One thing I think that would have been helpful for the victims in the case is this idea of the asset forfeiture, that there could have been some compensation paid to them. I think it's very unclear what happens now with the forfeiture of his assets with his death. I mean, the Second Circuit Court of Appeals recently held in a somewhat analogous case that criminal restitution would expire if the defendant died. So I think that's an open question, but there's still civil lawsuits pending as well. So I think there's some hope of getting some measure of justice. But most importantly, I think Joey would agree with this, is it really ratchets up the heat on following up on these other unnamed conspirators, to really find them, charge them, make them accountable, and get them to cooperate to expose what really happened.
Shan, you know, former mayor and former federal prosecutor Rudy Giuliani said that he believes Epstein's death makes those other cases more complicated or more challenging. Would you agree with that?
I don't know if it makes them more challenging. I think there's a very strong paper trail. They've obviously already interviewed some of those people, and it's clear if they were there and they helped, I don't think it's necessarily more challenging. Now, if I were the prosecutor, I would have been very hopeful that Epstein would have flipped, because guys like that tend to be very narcissistic, always looking to cut themselves a deal, and I would have had high hopes that he would have been a cooperating witness. But I think there is so much evidence, so much pressure on these other people that they're going to end up flipping and cooperating as well.
Attorney General William Barr is reportedly livid, and in a statement he said Epstein's death raises serious questions. He also says he's working with the Inspector General, who is opening a separate investigation. We've also heard from sitting members of Congress demanding answers. Senator Amy Klobuchar, for example, saying the Judiciary Committee should call a hearing about this. Joey, is that necessary?
Well, I think it is. I mean, it's nice that he's livid, but he should have been livid before, such that there would have been proper supervision, and such that someone who you knew to be suicidal, or should have known, had the ability to take his life. And I just don't get it. So it's nice that you're livid, sir, but what are you doing now? And so what is the investigation ultimately going to demonstrate? Some breakdowns in the system? We know there were breakdowns in the system. The real issue to me is getting compensation to the victims. So let's go back to Shan's point, which is a very critical one. Whenever you're prosecuted, you get civil forfeiture allegations, or criminal forfeiture allegations rather. That is, the proceeds of your crime get taken by the government. And so now, to what extent is that pursued? Do they now pursue civil forfeiture allegations? The reason I raise these issues is because I think the victims deserve some measure of compensation. They're not going to get to see him in court, but now certainly they should be compensated for what he did. So in the event the federal government pursues that, are they going to share any of the money recouped with the victims? That's essential to me. So yeah, have your hearing, determine how there were breakdowns, what went on, but most importantly, I think they need to also bring the other, right? Remember, he was charged with conspiracy. You don't do a conspiracy yourself. Other people were involved. To what extent did those aiders and abettors who allowed him to do this, they should be held accountable, number one, and number two, any monies recouped by the federal government needs to be shared with people who certainly were the subject of his alleged improprieties.
That civil litigation is really just getting started. And, you know, I read a bunch of statements earlier from attorneys of his accusers. One Los Angeles attorney today calling on administrators of Epstein's estate to freeze his assets and hold them for a victim's fund. You touched on this earlier, Shannon. I know Joey has too. But, I mean, what is the impact of Epstein's death on those potential civil cases filed against him?
Well, I think it complicates matters. I personally think it would be a great idea if the administrators of the estate did create some sort of fund and put those assets aside, but they are going to have some conflicting interests. I mean, they have a duty of loyalty to the estate, whoever that may be, the estate itself, to defend it. But I would also think that if I was one of those attorneys, I'd be thinking, I don't want to have this money just basically get dwindled away by defending case after case after case. It might be better to pull it all together and say, hey, let's put together a fund, let people take claims on that fund.
All right, Jan Wu and Joey Jackson. Thank you, gentlemen. Good to see you.
Good to see you,
Anna. And you.